You think you know England. You think it is all red telephone boxes and grey drizzle and people queuing politely for things they do not actually want. Every village a postcard of thatched roofs and cream teas and a church steeple poking through the mist. And yes, a good deal of it does look that way. But then there are the other places. Towns that look like they belong in Italy, in Switzerland, in India, in Scandinavia, anywhere except the country they actually sit in. I am old enough to have seen most of England, and I can tell you that some corners of this nation would confuse a geography teacher. So subscribe and let's start. Number 13. Saltaire, West Yorkshire. You drive through Bradford, which is about as English as it gets in the industrial sense, all Victorian brick and curry houses, and that particular brand of northern grit that makes the south look like it is made of tissue paper. And then, just 3 miles out, you arrive in Saltaire, and suddenly you are not in Yorkshire anymore. You are in a miniature Italian city that someone has built on the banks of the River Aire and forgotten to tell anyone about. Saltaire was the brainchild of Sir Titus Salt, a wool baron who made his fortune processing alpaca fibre and who, by the middle of the 19th century, had grown thoroughly disgusted with the filth and disease of industrial Bradford. Cholera was ripping through the slums, the air was black. Workers were dying in conditions that would make a modern health inspector faint on the spot. So Salt did something extraordinary. He packed up his entire operation, all 5 mills, and moved everything to a greenfield site by the river. But he did not just build a factory, he built an entire town. The architects he chose, Henry Lockwood and William Mawson, designed every single building in the Italianate style, inspired by the Italian Renaissance. Every window has a rounded arch. Every roofline has stone corbels and overhanging eaves. The Congregational Church, which is now the United Reformed Church, has an ornamental bell tower that would look perfectly at home overlooking the Arno in Florence. It is a Grade 1 listed building, which puts it in the same category as Buckingham Palace and Salisbury Cathedral. The mill itself is 6 stories high and 550 feet long, and its facade could pass for a Florentine palazzo if you squinted hard enough and ignored the Yorkshire rain. Salt built over 800 houses for his workers, all in that same classical Italian style, arranged in a perfect grid of stone terraces with gas lamps on every corner. He added a school, a hospital, almshouses for the elderly, public baths, and a park with a cricket pitch. He banned pubs because he did not want his workers getting drunk, and he banned washing lines because he thought they were unsightly. The man was a benevolent dictator with an eye for aesthetics, and the result is a town that looks like it was airlifted from Tuscany and dropped into the Aire Valley. In 2001, UNESCO declared Saltaire a World Heritage Site. Today, Salt's Mill houses one of the world's largest collections of David Hockney paintings, and the village has become a magnet for artists and musicians. The houses are still lived in, the streets are still walked, and the Italian bell tower still rises above the Yorkshire rooftops like a beautiful mistake that nobody ever bothered to correct. Number 12. Lynton and Lynmouth, Devon. When the Romantic poets Robert Southey and Percy Shelley first wandered into this corner of North Devon in the early 1800s, they did not call it English. They called it Little Switzerland. And honestly, the name has stuck for over 200 years because there is no better way to describe it. Lynton sits on top of a cliff. Lynmouth sits at the bottom, where the East Lynn and West Lynn rivers meet the sea. The two are connected by a cliff railway that has been operating since 1890, powered entirely by water. No electricity, no engines, just gravity and the weight of water tanks carrying passengers up and down a slope so steep that your stomach drops the moment you step inside. It is the steepest water-powered funicular railway in the world, and riding it feels like something out of a Swiss mountain resort, not a Devon seaside town. The landscape around the twin villages is what earns the comparison. The valleys are deep and narrow, carved through ancient rock by rivers that tumble over waterfalls and through gorges thick with oak and beech trees. The Valley of Rocks, a short walk from Lynton, is a geological spectacle of towering stone pillars and craggy outcrops where wild goats wander freely among the ruins of what looks like a collapsed civilization. The whole area sits within Exmoor National Park, and the combination of steep hillsides, rushing water, dense woodland and precipitous paths gives the entire landscape an alpine quality that feels nothing like the gentle green rollers most people associate with the English countryside. The twin villages became popular tourist destinations after the Napoleonic Wars, when English travellers who could no longer reach the continent discovered that Devon had its own version of Switzerland. The architecture reflects that era. Stone buildings with slate roofs clinging to the hillside, tea rooms perched on impossible gradients, and narrow lanes that twist upward like mountain paths. Lynmouth suffered a devastating flood in 1952 when 34 people died after 9 inches of rain fell on Exmoor in a single day, sending a wall of water through the village that destroyed over 100 buildings. The village was rebuilt, but the wild, untamable character of the place remained. Number 11. Brighton, East Sussex. Brighton is famous for many things: the Pebble Beach, the nightlife, the general sense that everyone there is either an artist, a DJ or both. But the thing that makes Brighton look genuinely un-English, the thing that stops tourists in their tracks and makes them wonder whether they have somehow stumbled into Rajasthan, is the Royal Pavilion. It sits in the middle of town like a hallucination. Onion domes, minarets, Mughal arches, Indo-Saracenic architecture rendered in Bath stone, rising from the centre of a Sussex seaside resort as if a Maharaja had decided to build a palace between the chippy and the bowling alley. The Royal Pavilion was built for King George IV, who first visited Brighton in 1783 at the age of 21 and fell in love with the place. He started with a modest farmhouse, which the architect Henry Holland turned into a neoclassical villa. But George was not a modest man. By 1815, he had hired John Nash to transform the whole thing into an Oriental fantasy, complete with Indian-inspired domes, Chinese-style interiors, cast iron palm trees in the kitchen, and a music room of such opulence that it would make a Bollywood set designer weep with envy. The exterior was inspired by the drawings of Thomas and William Daniel, who had spent years documenting the architecture of Mughal India. The result was something that contemporary critics called everything from magnificent to insane. The essayist William Hazlitt described it as a madhouse or a house run mad. The interiors are equally extraordinary, a riot of dragons, serpents, lotus flowers, and chandeliers that looked like they were designed by someone who had consumed a very large amount of opium and then been let loose in a Chinese porcelain factory. George died in 1830. Queen Victoria found it vulgar and cramped and sold it to the town of Brighton for over £50,000. During the First World War, it was converted into a hospital for wounded Indian soldiers, which added a poignant layer of irony to the whole affair. A building designed to look Indian, built by a British monarch obsessed with the Orient, used to care for Indian troops fighting for the British Empire. Today, it operates as a museum, and it remains one of the most genuinely startling buildings in England. Number 10. Sezincote, Gloucestershire. If the Royal Pavilion in Brighton is England's most famous piece of Indian architecture, then Sezincote is its quieter, more sophisticated older sibling, tucked away in the rolling Cotswold countryside near Moreton-in-Marsh as if it does not want to make a fuss. Sezincote is a Mughal Indian palace in the Cotswolds. Let that sink in for a moment. Surrounded by 3,500 acres of rolling green hills, dry stone walls, and sheep that could not look more English if they tried, there stands a building with an onion-shaped copper dome, minarets, peacock tail windows, and ornamental arches that belong on the banks of the Yamuna. In Agra, not in the middle of Gloucestershire, The house was built in 1805 for Sir Charles Cockerell, who had made his fortune working for the East India Company in Bengal. His brother Samuel Pepys Cockerell, a London architect who had never actually visited India, designed the building using drawings and engravings by the artist Thomas Daniel as his reference. The exterior is pure Mughal, rendered in local Cotswold stone that has been stained to resemble the red sandstone of Rajasthan. The interior, by contrast, is entirely European, all neoclassical columns and English country house elegance. It is as if someone took a perfectly respectable Georgian manor and dressed it in Indian clothes. The gardens are equally extraordinary. Designed by Humphrey Repton, they feature a Hindu temple dedicated to Surya, the sun god, a serpent pool, waterfalls, and grottos. When the Prince Regent visited Sezincote in 1807, he was so impressed that he went back to Brighton and told John Nash to build him something similar. The Royal Pavilion is a direct descendant of Sezincote. The estate is privately owned, open to visitors on certain days during summer. It is thought to be the only Mughal building surviving in Western Europe. Number 9. Clovelly, Devon. The first time you see Clovelly, you will think you have taken a wrong turn and ended up on a Greek island. Whitewashed cottages clinging to a cliff face, tumbling 400 feet down to a tiny harbour where fishing boats bob in water so blue it looks photoshopped. Cobbled streets so steep that no vehicle has ever driven down them in the entire history of the village. Donkeys and wooden sledges used to transport goods because nothing on wheels could possibly survive the gradient. Fuchsias and geraniums exploding from every windowsill. It looks like Santorini, if Santorini had a pub called the Red Lion and served cream teas. Clovelly has existed since at least the 13th century and was once owned by the Queen of England. In the 16th century, George Carey built the stone breakwater that created the harbour, turning the village into a fishing port and the only safe haven for ships along that stretch of the Devon coast between Appledore and Boscastle. For centuries, the cobbled High Street, which drops half a mile down the cliff face, was the only route between the plateau above and the shore below. Everything that went up or down that street did so on the back of a donkey. Today, the donkeys are still there, all rescued animals kept in stables that have housed working animals for over 100 years. The village is privately owned by the Clovelly Estate Company, led by John Roos, a descendant of the Hamlin family who have managed the place for generations. His ancestor Christine Hamlin dedicated herself to renovating the cottages in the early 20th century, preserving the village's character while keeping it alive as a working community. Almost all of the 71 buildings along the main street are architecturally listed. Only 7 are not. There are about 80 cottages in total, 2 chapels, 2 hotels, and approximately 2,000 acres of surrounding farmland. Visitors pay an entrance fee at the top, which covers parking and access to the village, the museums, and the gardens. The fee is essential because there is no vehicular access, so all maintenance and deliveries must come down that cobbled street by hand or by sledge. A Land Rover service runs visitors up and down via a back road for those who cannot manage the gradient. In the 2020s, approximately 150,000 visitors came per year. And every single one of them walks away wondering how something this Mediterranean ended up on the North Devon coast. Number 8. Knaresborough, North Yorkshire. If you blindfolded someone, drove them to Knaresborough, and then removed the blindfold at the right spot, they would swear they were looking at a town in the Dordogne or on the banks of the Rhine. A deep limestone gorge, 120 feet deep in places, carved over 16,000 years by the River Nid, with a ruined Norman castle perched on the cliff above, cave dwellings cut into the rock face, and a Victorian viaduct of such dramatic beauty that it looks like it belongs in a 19th century oil painting of southern France. Knaresborough has been confusing people for centuries. The gorge itself is the reason the town exists, and everything about it feels un-English. The streets are steep and narrow, twisting up from the river through layers of medieval and Georgian architecture. There are cave houses hewn directly from the limestone, troglodyte style, that would look perfectly at home in the Lot Valley or in a Rhineland fairy tale. The Chapel of Our Lady of the Crag was carved into the cliff face in 1408 by a stonemason called John, who wanted to give thanks after his son miraculously survived a falling boulder. It is one of only a handful of rock-cut chapels in England, and finding it tucked into the cliff beside the Nid feels more like stumbling upon a hermitage in Cappadocia than a chapel in Yorkshire. The town's most famous attraction is Mother Shipton's Cave, open to visitors since 1630, making it England's oldest tourist attraction. According to legend, the prophetess Ursula Saltaire was born in this cave in 1488 and went on to predict the defeat of the Spanish Armada and the Great Fire of London. Next to the cave is the petrifying well, where water with extremely high mineral content calcifies objects placed beneath it, turning teddy bears and top hats to stone over a period of months. The viaduct spanning the gorge was completed after the first one collapsed just days before its opening in 1848, raising the river level by 12 feet and killing hundreds of fish with lime from the mortar. The whole scene, castle, gorge, viaduct, river, cave, looks like something from a continental travel poster, not a market town 15 minutes from Harrogate. Number 7. Bude, Cornwall. Cornwall already feels like a different country to most English people, and Bude pushes that sensation even further with a feature that looks like it was borrowed from the Mediterranean coast and dropped onto the Atlantic shoreline of North Cornwall. The Bude Sea Pool is a semi-natural tidal swimming pool carved into the rocks at Summerlees Beach. It is approximately 90 metres long and 45 metres wide, holding around 4 million litres of seawater that is replenished by the Atlantic Ocean at every high tide. From above, it looks like something you would find on the coast of Portugal or the south of France. A vast, calm expanse of turquoise water framed by rocks and cliffs, with sunbathers arranged around its edges as if they were on the Amalfi Coast rather than the Cornish one. The pool was created in 1930, when the Thynne family put up half the money to build the pool and its sunbathing terraces. For over 90 years, it has provided safe swimming at Bude, sheltering bathers from the dangerous Atlantic currents and the surfers who dominate the adjacent beach. It is one of the very few tidal swimming pools still open to the public in the United Kingdom, and it is open 365 days a year, completely free of charge. The Friends of Bude Sea Pool, a volunteer-run charity formed in 2011, manages the pool entirely through donations and grants after public funding was withdrawn. The charity receives no regular government or council funding, which makes the pool's continued existence something of a small miracle. The water temperature ranges from around 11 degrees Celsius in April to about 18 in August, which is cold by Mediterranean standards but positively tropical by Cornish ones. The Rhurnlai and the Bude Surf Lifesaving Club use the pool for training. The pool is not symmetrical because it is partly natural, carved out of the existing rock formations and augmented with man-made walls and terraces. It is this combination of natural rock and turquoise water that gives it that Mediterranean look, an effect so convincing that photographs of the Bude Sea Pool are regularly mistaken for images of coastal pools in Greece or Croatia. Subscribe to prove that these videos actually help and actually make sense. Number 6. Staithes, North Yorkshire. You come over the hill and there it is, crammed into a narrow crevice between two headlands on the North Yorkshire coast, a tumble of red-roofed fishermen's cottages stacked on top of each other like a village that has been poured down a cliff and left to set. The harbour below is sheltered by high cliffs and two long breakwaters, and the whole scene looks less like Yorkshire and more like a fishing village on the Norwegian coast, or possibly something from the Italian Riviera if you catch it in the right light. Staithes was once one of the busiest fishing ports on the north-east coast of England. At its peak, nearly 300 fishermen worked from the harbour, with many more employed ashore as fish curers, boat builders, sailmakers, and coopers. The fishermen's wives, wearing traditional Staithes bonnets made from a full yard of cloth and reinforced at the crown for carrying boxes on their heads, packed the catch for dispatch inland. 3 trains a week carried fish from Staithes station to the rest of the country. Captain James Cook arrived here in 1744 as a 16-year-old apprentice to William Sanderson, a local grocer, before the call of the sea became too strong and he left to begin the career that would take him around the world. The village has changed remarkably little since the 1800s. Its narrow streets, known locally as ginnels, run like a maze through the village, linking houses and yards through passages so tight that Staithes is home to one of the narrowest alleys in the world, measuring just 18 inches wide. Smuggling was rife along this coast in the 17 and 1800s, and the whole village functioned as a network of escape routes, with underground tunnels and hiding places used to conceal contraband from customs officers. The artistic heritage of the village is equally remarkable. Beginning around 1880, a colony of impressionist painters settled in Staithes, drawn by its light, its landscapes, and the photogenic hardship of the fishing community. The Staithes group included Dame Laura Knight and her husband Harold, and their work documented a way of life that was already beginning to disappear. Today, the village still attracts artists, and each September, about 100 cottages become pop-up galleries for the Staithes Festival of Arts and Heritage. The problem with Staithes, if you can call it a problem, is that its beauty has been noticed. Many of the cottages in the lower village are now second homes or holiday lets, outnumbering permanently occupied homes. But the character remains. The handful of cobles still moored in the harbour, the cobbled lanes, the cod and lobster pub perched right on the waterfront, it all adds up to a village that feels more Scandinavian than English. Number 5. Bibury, Gloucestershire. William Morris, the Victorian artist and textile designer, called Bibury the most beautiful village in England. And while that is a bold claim in a country with roughly 13,000 villages competing for the title, it is hard to argue with him when you are standing on the stone bridge over the River Colne, looking at Arlington Row. Arlington Row is a line of medieval cottages built from honey-coloured Cotswold stone, originally constructed in 1380 as a monastic wool store and converted in the 17th century into weavers' cottages. They sit beside a boggy water meadow called Rack Isle, where wool was once hung out to dry on wooden frames after being washed. The scene is so impossibly pretty, so perfectly composed, that it looks more like a painting than a real place. It does not look English. It looks like something from a European fairy tale, a Brothers Grimm illustration rendered in stone and wildflowers and very clear river water. A picture of Arlington Row appears on the inside cover of every United Kingdom passport, making it the most depicted village in the world, and yet most of the people carrying that passport have never actually been there. The village has attracted international attention for decades. Henry Ford, the American car magnate, was reportedly so enchanted by Arlington Row that he tried to buy the entire terrace, dismantle it brick by brick, and ship it back to America. Fortunately for England, that never happened. Emperor Hirohito of Japan visited as a young prince, and the Japanese tourist connection has been strong ever since. In 2025, Forbes declared Bibury the most beautiful village in the world. The village sits on the River Colne in Gloucestershire, surrounded by meadows where water voles and kingfishers thrive. The Church of St. Mary the Virgin dates from the 8th century. The Bibury Trout Farm, founded in 1902, is one of the oldest in England. Visit early in the morning or late in the season when the mist sits on the meadow and the only sound is the river, and you will understand exactly what Morris meant. Number 4. St. Ives, Cornwall. You come around the headland and the light hits you before the view does. The quality of the light in St Ives is different from anywhere else in England. A pale, luminous brightness that bounces off the sea and the sand and the whitewashed buildings and gives the whole town a glow that belongs on the Mediterranean, not on the Atlantic coast of Cornwall. St Ives has been attracting artists since the 1880s, and the reason is always the same: the light. The town sits on a peninsula jutting into the Celtic Sea, exposed to light from almost every direction, and the effect is so distinctive that it spawned an entire school of modern art. Barbara Hepworth, Ben Nicholson, Patrick Heron, Terry Frost, they all came to St Ives because the light made their work better, because the colours were more vivid, because standing on Porthmeor Beach at sunset felt more like standing on a beach in the Cyclades than standing in Cornwall. The town itself reinforces the illusion. Narrow, winding streets climb steeply from the harbour through a jumble of whitewashed cottages with blue and green painted doors. Fishing boats line the harbour walls. Palm trees, actual palm trees, grow in sheltered spots along the seafront thanks to the warming influence of the Gulf Stream. The beaches are startling. Porthminster and Porthmeor have sand so white and water so clear that photographs of them are regularly mistaken for images of Greek islands. The Staithes and Ives Gallery sits right on Porthmeor Beach, its curved walls and panoramic windows framing views that look like they have been curated for maximum Mediterranean effect. The fishing heritage is genuine. St Ives was a major pilchard fishing port for centuries, and the narrow streets and densely packed houses reflect the needs of a community that lived around the harbour. But the combination of the light, the architecture, the palm trees, and the water gives the whole place a character that feels distinctly foreign. There are days in St Ives when you could genuinely believe you were on the coast of Brittany or the Algarve. Number 3. Lavenham, Suffolk. If someone told you they had found a medieval German town in the middle of the Suffolk countryside, you would not believe them. And then you would drive to Lavenham and change your mind entirely. Lavenham is one of the best preserved medieval towns in England, and its appearance owes everything to the wool trade that made it fabulously wealthy in the 14th and 15th centuries. At its peak, Lavenham was one of the 20 richest towns in England, generating more tax revenue than cities like York and Lincoln. That wealth was poured into buildings, and the buildings that were built are extraordinary. Over 300 of them are listed, and many date from the 14th and 15th centuries. They are timber-framed, oak-beamed, and wildly crooked, leaning at angles that seem to defy both gravity and planning permission. The plasterwork between the beams is painted in the distinctive Suffolk pink, a shade created by mixing lime wash with pig's blood or sloe berries. The effect is startling. Walking through Lavenham feels less like walking through an English village and more like wandering through a medieval quarter in Rothenburg ob der Tauber or Colmar. The timber frames are not hidden behind render or brick as they are in so many English towns. They are exposed and celebrated, black against pink and white, zigzagging across facades that have been leaning further and further out of true for 600 years. The Guildhall of Corpus Christi, built in 1529, dominates the market square with its carved corner post and elaborately decorated facade. The Church of Saints Peter and Paul, completed around 1525, is a masterpiece of perpendicular Gothic architecture, built with money from the cloth merchant Thomas Spring III, who was one of the wealthiest men in England when he died in 1523. Lavenham's decline, ironically, is what saved it. When the wool trade moved north in the 16th century, the town's economy collapsed, and nobody had the money to knock down the medieval buildings and replace them with something more modern. The town simply froze in time. By the time anyone thought about preservation, there was nothing to save it from except neglect. Today, Lavenham is a living museum with tea rooms in medieval buildings and antique shops in former merchants' houses, and the overall impression is of a town that wandered out of Central Europe sometime around 1450 and got lost in the English countryside. Number 2. Stamford, Lincolnshire. Stamford is the town that time forgot, and when you arrive, you will spend at least 10 minutes trying to work out which country you are actually in. The answer is England, but your eyes will be telling you France. Stamford is built almost entirely from honey-coloured limestone, and its Georgian and medieval architecture has been so perfectly preserved that it has been used as a filming location for period dramas more times than most towns can count. It was the first town in England to be designated a conservation area back in 1967, and the reason is immediately obvious. There are no modern intrusions. No glass-fronted office blocks. No brutalist car parks. Just street after street of elegant stone buildings with sash windows, classical proportions, and an air of quiet provincial dignity that feels more like Bordeaux or Bath than a market town in Lincolnshire. The town has over 600 listed buildings, including 5 medieval churches, and the overall effect is of a small French city that has somehow materialised between Peterborough and Grantham. The streets are wide and tree-lined. The squares are open and graceful, and the River Welland slides through the centre of town with a serenity that feels continental rather than English. The George Hotel, a former coaching inn, has a gallows sign that stretches across the main road, a relic from the days when the Great North Road ran through the centre of Stamford and the town served as a stopping point for travellers between London and the north. The comparison with France is not accidental. Stamford stone comes from the same geological belt that runs through the Cotswolds and into the limestone buildings of northern France. The warm cream-coloured facades have that same quality of light and solidity that you find in Burgundy or the Loire Valley. Daniel Defoe, writing in the 1720s, described Stamford as one of the finest towns in England, and it has barely changed since. It missed the worst of the Industrial Revolution, which is why its character survived intact. Number 1. Whitby, North Yorkshire. And at the top of this list sits a town that does not merely look un-English, it feels un-English. It feels like the opening scene of a horror film set in Transylvania, transplanted to the North Yorkshire coast by a scriptwriter with a wicked sense of humour. Whitby is famous for 2 things above all others: its ruined abbey and its connection to Dracula. Bram Stoker stayed in Whitby in 1890 and was so struck by the atmosphere of the place that he made it the setting for Count Dracula's arrival in England. The vampire's ship, the Demeter, crashes onto Whitby's shore in the novel, and the undead Count leaps ashore in the form of a large black dog. Stoker did not choose Whitby at random. The town looks like the kind of place where vampires would feel at home. The ruined abbey, perched on the east cliff 200 feet above the harbour, has been standing in various states of decay since Henry VIII dissolved it in 1539. To reach it, you must climb 199 stone steps that wind up the cliff face through a churchyard full of leaning headstones worn smooth by centuries of sea wind. On a foggy evening, with the mist rolling in off the North Sea and the ruins silhouetted against a grey sky, the scene is pure Gothic. It looks like a hilltop in Wallachia, not a seaside resort in Yorkshire. The town itself is split in 2 by the River Esk, with the Old Town on the east side connected to the west by a swing bridge. The Old Town is a labyrinth of narrow alleys, red-roofed cottages, and steep stone staircases. Whitby jet, a fossilised wood found in the local cliffs, has been carved into jewellery since the Bronze Age and became enormously fashionable after Queen Victoria wore it during her mourning for Prince Albert. The jet shops still line Church Street, their dark interiors adding to the town's reputation as a place where darkness is celebrated rather than feared. Whitby hosts a Gothic weekend twice a year, drawing thousands dressed in Victorian mourning clothes and steampunk costumes. Captain Cook learned his seamanship here, and the town has been a working fishing port for over 1,000 years. Standing at the top of those 199 steps, looking down at the harbour and the red roofs and the dark sea beyond, you are not in England. You are somewhere between Eastern Europe and the imagination of every Gothic novelist who ever lived. And that is why Whitby sits at the top of this list. Not because it looks like another country, because it looks like another world entirely. And that is what makes these 13 towns so remarkable. England is not what you think it is. It never has been. Beneath the thatched roofs and the cream teas and the queues, there are places that look like Italy, India, Switzerland, Scandinavia, France, and Greece. Places that make you question your assumptions about a country you thought you knew. Places that prove, once and for all, that the most surprising thing about England is England itself. I am an old man. And old men worry. Take care of yourselves.